So tonight, this broadcast is all about using Live as a host for your plugins to play keys on stage or play them live. So first, I'm going to start by showing you exactly what I do, and then going through some sound creation, and we'll take some questions as well. So first, let's talk about controllers, and this is really going out to those guys who are brand new to using a computer to make music or make sound and play things live. So you will need obviously a laptop with Ableton Live and some kind of MIDI controller. There are tons out there, and if you have the ability to plug in and use a controller with a USB, that's going to be the easiest setup for you. So I have in front of me an Axiom 25, and that's just going to take a USB and plug it directly into my computer. So if I go to my Preferences tab and go to the MIDI Sync tab in there, I have a bunch of different options here. I just want to make sure that that Axiom 25 has the track turned on. And then if I want to control different things in Live, we need to turn remote on as well. So let's turn that on now, and we'll talk about that in a second. So with those two inputs turned on for the Axiom 25, I can now play some notes on my keyboard. And I will see this yellow light showing in the top right corner. And that means Ableton Live is getting MIDI information from that controller. It's set up correctly and it's plugged in correctly. If you're using Windows, that makes sure that all of your drivers are installed correctly, all that good and fun stuff. All right, so now we have a controller plugged in, ready to go, and we need to make some sounds. So first, let's open up the browser, and I'm going to show you how I load up software synths to play live, and some tricks I've learned by making mistakes live. So let me start by just loading in a piano sound. So I'm going to go to Instruments. I'm going to go to the Instrument Rack. Under the Piano and Keys, I'm going to double-click on Grand Piano. So now that's created a new MIDI track for me. And with my routing set correctly, I have all my ins selected. So that means any MIDI controller plugged in and ready to go, this track will receive that MIDI on. So if I play my MIDI controller, I will see the orange or the little yellow lights light up, and since this track is armed, I can hear it as well. Okay, great. So now, let me just turn on my mic a little bit, get a little balance. Okay, there we go. So now, let's start by selecting another sound. And let's use a Rhodes sound. So I'm going to drag that in. This is another way of adding an instrument or device. Drag it in, let go. Now I have two different tracks. And with the second track armed, I have sound coming from that device. So when we're playing live, we want to switch back and forth really quickly. And here's one of the tricks that I've come up with. We can start MIDI mapping different things. So right away, what we want to do, or what you might be thinking, is we want to MIDI map our mute or maybe our record. And I can get kind of hairy, and here's why. If we MIDI map, or let me take a step back and explain the muting and the MIDI mapping. So if we arm both tracks, we can play both devices at the same time. Okay. And if we start MIDI mapping our mutes, and we can do that very easily by clicking the key, MIDI map in the top right. And now if I select number 2, I'm going to click on it and push on my keyboard, on my typing keyboard, the number 1. We can see that's been mapped to the mute button of this track. Let's do the same thing with second track and hit number 2. Get out of MIDI map mode. Now I can mute and unmute these two tracks with my keyboard. And this is great. The only bad thing is, if I want to play my piano, I hear just the piano, hit 1 and 2 and it flip-flops, and now I just play the Rhodes. So this is how I started doing it, and after a while I started adding more and more and more instruments. And the bad thing is that even though I don't hear the piano right now, my CPU or my DSP is being used to activate or to trigger that plugin or that device. We don't want that, because if you start adding more and more different devices and sounds, or maybe more third-party plugins, we don't want them all to be triggered at the same time. So let's try a different option. With the routing at the top, we can change the monitor mode. So let's change it from auto to in. And what this allows us to do is not have to arm our tracks or that MIDI to trigger the device. So here we have the same kind of situation, with one of them being muted and the other one coming through, and both devices are being triggered, and the DSP is being used to play those devices. Okay, we don't want that. So how can we make one track play without the other one? And I've come up with a way to do that. We're going to create 2 more MIDI tracks. You can do create MIDI track, create MIDI track. So now we're just going to route the MIDI. And this is really cool. So I'm going to enable the first one piano, the second one Rhodes. I'm just using the shortcut Command-R on a Mac to rename those 2 tracks. And now we can send the MIDI from this piano track to the track with the actual device on it. So watch what happens. We have MIDI from all inputs. So all inputs, we can see that our MIDI controller is being received on both those tracks. We want to make sure our monitor is turned to in. That way we don't have to worry about arming or disarming and all that stuff. And we can send our MIDI to a specific track. So let's send this to that grand piano track. And the same thing with the Rhodes. So right now we have MIDI coming into this track, piano track. The monitor is set to in, so there's no, so it's always monitoring that MIDI. It's never going to depend on if it's armed or not. And that MIDI is getting passed through to the 2 tracks on the right. Now these 2 also are receiving MIDI from all in. We don't want that. We just want them to receive the MIDI from these 2 tracks. Let's turn that to no input. With everything set to monitor in, watch what happens. I'm going to remap these key mappings, remove them from the last 2 tracks, and change them to the first 2 tracks. Like that. I can hit Command-K to get out of key map mode. And now, 1 and 2 on my typing keyboard is muting and unmuting my 2 MIDI tracks. So basically, I am blocking or unblocking the MIDI from getting to these 2 tracks and triggering those devices. So watch what happens. With them both activated, I can play both sounds. If I hit 2, I can stop the MIDI to getting to those Rhodes. And I can flip-flop by hitting 1 at the same time. And the really nice thing is that no MIDI is getting to those 2 the device that's turned off to trigger my CPU. And there's another cool trick with this as well. So if I am playing a pad sound on track number 1, we can swap that out. Matt McCoy has got this really cool ad that's available up on loopcommunity.com. I'm going to drag that into our piano track and just replace it with this pad sound. Okay, so now if I want to, I can hold just a 1-5-1, so C, G, C in the key of C. And if I wanted that If I want that to sustain and continue and then play the Rhodes, I'm going to hold the sustain pedal and turn off the track. And I turned it off before I let go of the sustain pedal. Now that device never got the sustain off message from the sustain pedal. So now I'm not touching anything. I can turn on my Rhodes. Oops, let's change that. I can play on top of that pad. And if I want to stop the pad, I just turn that track on and touch the sustain pedal. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Got some water. All right, let's see. So any questions so far? I know we've gone over a lot. Let me see if Matt's got any questions for us. All right, we'll wait for those to come in. So next, let's talk about routing some third-party plugins. So a lot of guys, of course, will be using live plugins or live devices. But for those of you who are using third parties, there's a way we can route those plugins to different tracks. So let's show you what that looks like just really quickly. I'm going to be using Omnisphere, and we're going to use the same trick that we used before. Okay, and really quickly, Omnisphere, for those of you who don't know, allows us to load up to 8 different sounds. And this is true with Contact and a bunch of other different third parties. So within Omnisphere, I can change the output. Right now, by default, I'm just going to pick let's just pick 2 different sounds real fast. So I have 2 different pad sounds. Here's the first one. And the second one. Okay. And now if I wanted to separate those out and maybe affect them differently or send them down different tracks or channels to front of house, I can do that very easily. Within the mixer, and this is the same within Contact, you can do the same thing. Change the output of the 2 different tracks. This is out A, out B. So now by creating a third track, this time it's going to be an audio track, I can now capture or grab the output that's set to out B. So we have post mixer, which is out of out A, and now I have 3 and 4. So now whenever I play my first sound, it'll come down this track. And if I play the second sound, it'll come down my third track. that allows me to affect them differently again and have more control over each individual sound. So Matt's got some questions for us. For those of you who joined late, my name is Scott Dugan, and Matt McCoy is also with us. He's going to be feeding me some questions. And there is a little bit of a delay in the broadcast, about a minute delay. So bear with us as we get the questions and answer them as quickly as we can. So the first question is, where can I get the Shine Worship Pad? I was using the Shine Worship Pad earlier. And Loop Community has this really cool feature called Sound Park. And it allows any of you to first download certain patches that have been made by other users. And it's kind of like Loop Community's loop tracks, but for sound. And if you are making sounds, you're a producer, or you're a keyboard player, or you just like making new sounds, you can actually upload those and sell them. So it's a really cool way to trade and to pick up new sounds, just like you trade and pick up new loops and new tracks. So the second question is, how can I add delays and different effects to my piano sound? A great question. So let's go back to the piano we had up. Just going to rename this piano. And for the sake of just demonstrating, I'm not going to do the dual track thing for right now. So let's go into instruments, and now with the power of this new browser in Live 9, I can just type in piano, and any instrument with piano in its name will be shown. So I'm going to pick grand piano, a pretty nice sounding acoustic piano. And now we can do a couple different things. We can add them directly on the track, and by mean directly, we could add it just after the piano. So one good effect to do that with is, say, compression. Let's do that right now. We can get that kind of a tacky type sound. So there's with the compressor on. If we turn that off, we turn it up a little bit. Let me try and even those out so we can hear the difference. Second. Gain, what does that map to? So gain is mapped to a macro control, and by hovering over it, we can see down the bottom in the orange, the parameter is mapped to hardness. Now, I don't want to change that parameter with a macro control, so I'm just going to unmap it. We can get some gain on this piano. Go. Okay. So here's the piano without any effects after it. Let's drop down the makeup gain. So now we have that compressed, kind of harsh, attacky type sound. Okay, so that's one to add in line, I would say, right after the device on that track. So now let's create a send, a delay send that we can add a delay on and send that piano to. Let's do create, insert return track, and now let's do a ping pong delay. I'm going to drag that over here. And I'm going to make sure that's set to 100% wet, since it is on a return track. And now I can send the piano to that delay. And the great thing about using a send is if I were to create another instrument, let's say that Rhodes again, I can send that to the same delay. All right, so we've got another question. Let's take a look. If I need to quickly switch sounds for different songs, is there a way to assign MIDI commands? I am thinking maybe MIDI mapping that to a keyboard, like your actual playing keyboard. I'm guessing that's what you mean. So it's almost the same as MIDI mapping. Now this is really cool as well. So we had MIDI map turn on. I'm sorry, take a step back. Key mapping. We looked at this screen. We key mapped 1 to track 1 and 2 to track 2, like that. So easy. Now let's do it with MIDI map. So instead of using our typing keyboard, which we're using right now in key map mode, let's go to MIDI map mode. And now, with remember we turned on in preferences, we turned on this remote option. This allows us to use that Axiom 25 in MIDI map mode. So I like to use the lowest or the highest keys on my controller because I never play them. This is really like a key switch. So if I go down to the lowest octave and I select track number 1, I'm going to ignore the mic track, and hit C, I have now mapped that to the note C. The Rhodes is now I'm going to map that to C sharp. Okay, we can see that here. Get out of MIDI map mode. And now by hitting excuse me, C and C sharp at the same time, they just flip-flop. Oh. Lowest octave, remember? So that's how you go back and forth between them really fast. We can do this with like if you have a what are they called, the Korg nano controllers, you can put that right in front of you on your keyboard. I have with the LoopLIVE, you can do this, I bet. Send different MIDI messages to live. You can also do it with a bunch of different controllers with your feet. So there's tons of different options to switch your sounds on the fly using MIDI map mode. Okay, the next question is, can you show us how you can run tracks and play keys simultaneously? What about audio routing? So that's really easy. If we want to run tracks in session view, which I highly recommend, this is how you do it. I'm going to pull in, let's get a song real fast. So we've got here tracks. Let's do Furious maybe. Well, I think let's do Furious. Let's set our BPM to 106. My organization has the BPM in the actual name of the project. And now I'm going to drag that set in with and I'll have the tracks with. Let the hard drive spin up real fast. Okay, I'm just going to let go where it says drop files and devices here. So it's created new track, and it's put any devices that are on those as well. So you can see I have a demo track. This is actually the song that's recorded from the album, and it came with a device. And that's just how I saved it. So now I can rename the scene, Furious, and I'm going to put the BPM just to make sure it launches at the right tempo. Okay, so if I were to launch this, we will hear Furious. Okay, and the great thing is they can live right next to each other, no problem. And you just use the same trick that I used before if you want to switch back and forth alongside the track. So we can turn on our Rhodes. So that's actually in C. Oops. That is in C. I got it right. There we go. Never mind. Okay. So I'm playing along with it. And now I would highly recommend, if you're going to do this, to get an audio interface. And this allows you to send different tracks out of different outputs on your interface. And that's as simple as picking where you want them to go out of the Audio 2 drop-down menu. So external out, and this is where you'd pick it. Now currently I'm only using 1 and 2 out, so you don't see more than one. But if I were to switch to my audio interface, I'd have 1 through 8. So when I do this, and I play live, I'll separate any keys, and I'll go down maybe 1 and 2. Any pads, synths, lead stuff will go down 3 and 4. And then any tracks might go down 5 and 6. And 7 might be a mono something, so the bass would go down 7, sub drop would go down 7, and then my click would go out of the Q out, number 8. So with a Motu Ultralight, I have 8 separate sends that I can now give to front of house, and they can mix them completely separate. And if I were to drop in some more clips and launch through them, it's not going to affect my keys or my key switching at all in the track to the left. And you can hide these, you can kind of shrink them down. You can put like a buffer track in between them, do something like this. However you need to organize it to make it look pretty and make it so you understand it. You can also make sure you change the Audio 2 on your sends if you're going to be sending out different outputs on your interface. So let's look at another question. Can you explain the MIDI preferences? The preferences being track, remote, and sync. What do those mean? How do I enable my M Audio keyboard to work within Live? Okay, so we went over that at the very, very beginning, and I think a lot of guys joined late, and that's probably our fault because we were running late as well. So under preferences, we have a MIDI sync tab, and this is very important whenever you're dealing with controllers, MIDI controllers. So right now you can see any MIDI device that's plugged into my computer right now. There's an Axiom 25, and that's right in front of me, and that's the keyboard I've been playing. Next there's an APC 40. My push is not turned on, but that would pop up and show if it was turned on. So next to every single MIDI controller, there's a track, sync, and remote option. Track, when that's turned on, it allows us to send notes to Live. So it allows us to play the controller, and Live interprets that as notes, and it sends that to devices, and we get sound out. So if I play my controller, we can hear it. If I turn off track, it doesn't let those notes get to the device. Can't do anything. So we want that on for MIDI controller. Let's hop over to remote. Now, when I was MIDI mapping, and I was mapping the lowest C and C sharp to the 2 mute or activate buttons, remote needs to be turned on to do any MIDI mapping. If I turned off remote, I could not MIDI map anything. And that goes with any controller. So if you have an APC 40, if you have faders on your if you have any faders on your controller, remote has to be turned on so you can MIDI map those and use them within Live. Sync. Sync allows you to use MIDI clock with different controllers or different devices. So let's say I have a MIDI brute in my studio. I have a MIDI cord going from my computer to the MIDI brute, and the MIDI brute has the option to turn on an arpeggiator or an LFO, and that can be synced timecode. Excuse me, man, getting over a cold. So the only way that Mini Brute will receive MIDI clock is if sync is turned on. When I turn sync on, and this would have to be on an output, so say the MIDI Express, the output 1 on MIDI Express is being sent to the Mini Brute. If sync turned on, the Mini Brute can now pick up the tempo that Live is set to. So with this all set up right, sync turned on of the output, and that output is being sent to my Mini Brute. The arpeggiator on that Mini Brute will be set to 106, just like Live it. If I change 106, if I change that to 200, the Mini Brute will follow. So if you're using a controller and no external hardware or gear, that's really not for you, but that's what it does. So just to review, plug in your MIDI controller, turn on track, turn on remote, and then it'll work fine with Live. So next question. Can you recommend a good MIDI piano that has great action for using with Live? I'm guessing you're talking about a MIDI controller that's weighted, maybe full 88 keys. My favorite is actually a Roland Phantom. I think that feels the most natural. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. The next one is probably a Nord stage piano. Those are a little bit more expensive. But to me, those feel really good. If you want a cheap, really cheap solution, I actually have a Kurzweil PC88. Obviously, it's not going to feel as good, but it works for me, and I can play piano just fine with it. So let's see what's next. Okay, for layering sounds, do you recommend using separate tracks or an instrument rack? Can you show us how you can use an instrument rack for sound? It's a great question. So, for those of you who have not used instrument racks or drum racks or effect racks, there's a really cool feature with Live. It allows me to basically group two devices on one track instead of having to spread them over multiple tracks. And let me give you an example. So here I have the piano and the Rhodes on two separate tracks. What I'm going to do is group this piano and watch what happens. I'm going to right click, hit group, and now I've created an instrument rack. And now I can take that Rhodes, I'm just going to click and drag and drop it in the instrument rack. So now, if I were to play my MIDI controller and unmute the track, of course, here we go. We're going to have both the grand piano and the Rhodes triggered on that one track. Okay. Now something really cool can happen with this. We can create a split. So now only notes above C4, or is that B3? Let's do this. Okay, so B3 and up will be the piano. And when I play some notes, we can actually see which notes I'm playing. Everything below B3 will be Rhodes. Okay. We can do a crossfade between the two. So I'm dragging the big green bar. I can now drag the small light green bar above and create a crossfade. Okay, there's that option, which is really cool, because if we start creating, say you want it to be a bass in the left hand, you wanted there to be a Rhodes in the middle, and you wanted maybe a lead to be in the top, we can do this very easily using an instrument rack. We can also separate them by velocity. So here we've separated them by key. We can separate them by velocity. So if I play really, really hard, I'll get the piano. If I play soft, I will get the Rhodes. The numbers on top are just telling me what velocity I'm playing. And finally, we can use a chain, and we have a selector at the top. What this allows us to do is pick which instrument or instruments are triggered depending on where this chain selector is. So right now it's set to 0. I play something on my MIDI controller, I get nothing. If I move that chain selector to chain number 1, I get the piano. Chain number 2, I get the Rhodes. Now this can be very, very powerful. If I were to use a MIDI controller, I can map it to the chain selector, like that, mappable. And I can also use, I won't show it now, it's kind of cumbersome, but if you want to learn how to do this, there's actually a couple YouTube videos up by me, and there's also one-on-one training that we can actually go over this and show you exactly how to set it up in your setup. But it'll allow you to use dummy clips to change this selector. And let me explain that real fast. Let's say I had a different piano for each song. I have an 8-song set. I have 8 different pianos loaded in this instrument rack. When I launch scene number 1, the dummy track will move the chain selector to chain number 1. If I launch song number 2, we'll move the chain selector to chain number 2. So I'm just launching my scenes on the right, and that dummy track is moving my chain selector for me. I use that a lot, actually, whenever I have to do some really fast, really big changes in the middle of songs or the middle of sets. So if I have maybe 3 different controllers around me, I launch a song or launch a scene, and for the verse it's one thing, for the chorus it's something else. I don't have to worry about which one's changed, it just does it all for me. The only downside to using an instrument rack is that each track can only be processed by one of your CPUs. So I'm using an 8-core CPU. The track can only be processed by one core. It can't spread over multiple cores. So if I had a huge amount of devices inside an instrument rack, that's a lot of processing can only be absorbed by one core. So if you're running into some glitching, you can try separating that over a couple different tracks. The other advantage that I like using separate tracks is I can look down real fast and see exactly what is active. And depending on how comfortable you are with the set and how much practicing you've done, one could be better than the other. If you're just going week to week and playing different songs, my opinion and what I do is put different sounds on different tracks. That way I can look down and see exactly what's active. If I'm doing something like a show with a band that I've played over and over and over again, I would put it in an instrument rack and launch a scene and just know that it's going to work. And that way I don't have to think about it. I'm not improvising. I'm just playing something I've always played. Let's go on to another question. Okay, Tracy wants to know, how do I get my third-party plugins to show up in Ableton? Great question. So by default, we cannot see our plugins under the plugin category. Don't know why it does that. We just have to turn it on. Let's go into Preferences. Under File and Folder, under that tab, we just have to turn on the audio units and turn on VSTs. Turn it on, quit live, restart live, and they will show up on the left. So Tracy also wants to know, Do you recommend sending multiple tracks separately back to the front of house mixer, or all one output with click separate? So this comes down to, first of all, what can your setup handle? What does your audio interface allow you to do? It comes down to what does your audio engineer have available to you. Does he want or have the ability to run, say, 8 lines to a keyboard? And what does the mixer's limitations? I hate to say it, but also how much do you trust your front of house guy? If you play, if you're going to a new venue you've never played at and you don't know this guy, he doesn't know your songs, he doesn't know, the style maybe. You simply just don't trust him. It might be beneficial for you to send him a stereo line that you can mix in your headphones or in your in-ears, and it's going to be the same out there. You like your lead stuff really hot, you like your pad stuff really low, or whatever. He's going to get it exactly how you want. Now, that is probably the worst or the better of what do you say? The worst case scenario. That's kind of like if you have to do it that way. I really like and recommend talking to your front of house guy, talking to your monitor guy. The best thing to do is communicate. If you want the pads, separate everything out. You want the lead lines hot. You want the piano hot. Just communicate. Your music director or your worship leader just needs to have open communication with your front of house guy. He is the most important member of the band. And I think separating everything out is the way to go, because now your front of house guy can EQ and compress your piano separately from your lead line or your pad or your organ or your Rhodes or whatever. So that is the way to go if you want to give him the most options and the ability to do the best job that he can. Okay, the next question is, can you talk about macros, or how I can assign knobs on my keyboard to turn up and down effects? That's a great question. Macros are one of my favorite things inside of Live. Let me get a real quick drink of water and we'll talk about them in just a second. All right. Macros. Macros are awesome. So let's start brand new. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-Tab or Command-Shift-T. Not that one. Command-Shift-T to create a new MIDI track. And now let's just drop. Let's do some sound design. So let's just drop a analog onto that MIDI track. So now let's talk about, we'll hit 2 birds with 1 stone. We'll talk about the macros. We'll also talk about some sound design. A lot of guys I'm reading on the forums and just in general want to learn how to create sound and want to create really good sounds. Maybe they have a sound that is cool, but it's just really static and not very interesting and just doesn't have that magic polish on top of it. And the trick, the key to making really cool sounds, whether that be the pad sound that you play in the down part of the song or in between songs, or the lead line that rips everyone's head off and we can't wait to play because the keyboard player never gets a lead line. The trick to making those sound good is modulation. You want movement. You want something to happen when you hold a chord down. If we go back to old analog days and you played a chord on, say, a Juno or an Oberheim, there's going to be a little bit of detuning that's going to give it some nice movement and the nice chorusy type of a sound. So let's start with analog, and I'll show you how we can create some movement by detuning and LFOs, and then we will use the macro controls to control that detuning. So here I have an analog. If I play it, I'm just going to simply use the saw waveform, sawtooth, and on the amplifier I'm just going to turn up the sustain so it's always on when we hold the note. Very simple sound. Doesn't sound like a pad yet, but we can make it sound like a pad, or like a nice thick Oberheim sound. So what I'm going to do is right click, and I'm going to group, and now I'm going to change a little bit. I'm going to detune this up just a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to just option drag into the instrument rack, and it's going to duplicate it. So I have two analogs doing exactly the same thing. Now let's make it go the opposite way when I detune it. Okay, let's see what that sounds like, as opposed to just one. So we've already added some modulation by detuning the two. And now we can make this sound really cool by panning them hard left and hard right. Okay, so now let's do it again. And this time, let's change the pan, the side they're being panned to. So now the flat detuning is going left instead of the sharp. Let's change the octave. Okay, so we've got some nice big sounds, but that can get very static very quickly. Okay, so now let's use the LFO to create more movement. And turn on the LFO, and let's actually map this to let's do the tuning, the pitch. I'm just going to change the pitch. Let's do 0.01. And watch what happens if I solo this. So it's just moving ever so slightly. But if I do this to every single LFO, give me a second here, and just make the LFO ever so slightly different as far as rate, each one of these different analogs is going to be changing pitch ever so slightly. And this is just emulating a classic analog synthesizer. Okay? That's a big sound. It kind of sounds like that Phil Wickham. We can do different things to make that even bigger and punchier. So let's actually do that. Stop talking about it and do it. So let's add a chorus. And chorus is basically, again, adding modulation. It's changing stuff over time. And if we want this to be, instead of so aggressive, we want this to make this nice and mellow. So let's add a filter. Maybe make this a low pass. Okay. We can have a nice sweet pad sound too here. Okay. There's other things we can do as well. We can start modulating the filter. We can start moving different parameters to make this even more interesting. And so that's a little bit of a sound design. We can do delay. We can do flanger. Just different things to make movement. And it's not going to be so annoying and so stagnant if we hold out this long chord. So now let's get to macro controls. First thing we're going to do is group everything that we're using. I'm going to select all by holding Shift, clicking on the first device, and clicking on the last device. The shortcut is Command G. So I group those all in another instrument rack. This kind of goes down the rabbit hole very quickly, but we have an instrument rack within an instrument rack. And I'm just doing that so I can access the chorus and the filter with these macro controls. So this is as simple as picking something, whether that be the panning. Let's map the panning. Come on. Oops. Okay, cool. So now we are mapping panning, and we can actually invert some of these. Invert that one, invert that one. So now macro 1, let's make these 0 actually. Let's go from right. Did I do that right? No, I didn't do that right. There we go. Okay, so with the macro all the way down, it's going to be completely centered, no stereo image at all. When I turn that macro, it's going to widen everything out. It's going to change these parameters. Okay, we can also do this with, say, the chorus or the auto filter. So let's say I want to use a macro to control the auto filter. I can map that to macro number 1 and change the amount of chorus. Let's map that to macro number 2. And now we can map our stereo image to macro number 3. So here on the big overview instrument rack, we have the frequency, we have the dry wet of the chorus, and we have the chain controlling our left and right stereo image. So let's well, and the cool thing about that is we can map multiple devices or multiple parameters to one macro. So let's say I wanted that chorus dry wet to only go to also be on macro number 1. So as I turn up macro number 1, it's turning up the chorus and the auto filter. So that's the power of macro controls. Let's see what other questions we have. Sorry, let me completely answer the question. If I go into MIDI map mode, I can now map that macro to something on my controller. So if I click on it, move a device or parameter on my MIDI controller, it's going to map that. So now one of the potentiometers on my Axiom 25 is mapped to macro number 1. Okay, so that's coming full circle. I hope that answered your question. I know I went really fast, but that's how you do it. So next, really simple, how do I arm multiple tracks at the same time? That's really easy. We're just going to hold Command while clicking arm. Make sure that's set to, well, let's not do that because we'll get some feedback. If I just created some MIDI tracks, I'm going to hold Command and just click on the arm button. Let's see what's next. Is there a way to make the chain deactivate an unused instrument to save core usage? In short, no. The chain needs to, let's see here, go back. If I were to drop something else on there, let's do this one. The chain is not going to deactivate, and by deactivate he means turn off the instrument rack, the device, to save CPU. Well, is that what he asked, or is that me answering the question in the Yeah, that's what he asked. Yeah. So to save CPU, you can deactivate certain instruments. Doing that. So if you had a long list of, say, 10 or 20 different devices or instruments in this instrument rack, deactivating those devices is going to save your CPU in the long run. He's asking if the chain selector, which is this here, can do that automatically. The quick answer is no. You can do it with a dummy track, but it's so hard. It's so long to set up, and it's really not worth it. I would just suggest having multiple tracks. So let's say you put 4 devices on this one, and make sure you leave 0, that no device is being sent MIDI. So right now, nothing's being sent MIDI. Move it to 1. Crunch is getting MIDI. So, or the Supersaw is getting MIDI. Now the crunched road sound is getting MIDI. So if I were to do this again, let's just duplicate it for time's sake. Do something like this, and I can go back and forth. So 4 devices on track number 1, for instance, for example, 4 devices on track number 2, just to split up the CPU load. And I just make sure chain 0 is selected on track 1 when I'm playing devices on track 2, and vice versa. And that's so easy to do, and it's a lot faster than trying to deactivate devices within an instrument rack. So Nicholas wants to know, he says, Scottie, you talked about adding delay to your piano sound. How do you make it sync to your BPM or tap tempo? Oh, that's so awesome, and it's so easy. It's already done for you. Right now, ping pong, it has number 3 selected. That means 3 16th notes, and that means it's a dotted 8th note, and that's a dotted 8th note of 106. So right now, it's already synced without doing anything. And let me show you. We've got. Okay. I'm going to turn on my metronome, hit play. Let's make it a quarter note. Make it a dotted 8th note. Or make it an 8th note. So it's already done for you. And all the other delays are similar. So that's the ping pong delay. Simple delay has the same kind of setup. So you're picking how many 16th notes you want that delay to be. A lot of the other devices also have that option. So say the auto filter, the auto pan. The auto pan, we can change the rate from hertz to subdivisions as well. And this is all going back to Live's BPM that's in the top left corner. So next, I have Live 9 intro and don't have many sounds, okay? Can you tell me how I can get more sounds? Is that what Live Packs are from Ableton? So Live Packs use Sampler, which is well, I should say a lot of them use Sampler. And you should have Sampler in intro, I believe. I'm very certain, but I'm not 100%. So Sampler basically allows you to input and load your own recorded samples and play those live. I know a lot of packs also use, say, operator and stuff like that. So you'll have to read and see exactly what the live pack uses before you buy them. But yes, that's a great way to get third-party sounds. Also, they also have a lot of drum racks, and I know you have drum racks as an intro user. Another way is you can buy the individual devices too. So say you don't want to buy the Live 9 standard, but you really want analog. You can go on there and buy just analog, or you can go on there and buy just operator. obviously another way to get more sounds is by third parties. I would say a great place to start is, and this is just me, is Complete or Native Instrument stuff. You've heard me talk about Omnisphere. I think that investment, if you're a keys player, is well worth it over and over and over. Omnisphere is my go-to whenever I'm trying to make something inspiring. And I know it's a lot of money to dump into software, but it's well worth it. Okay, so next question is, I don't hear my keyboard, but I see the meter bouncing. Does this have to do with the in, auto, and off? Now I'm guessing the meter bouncing, and I'm guessing, is one of two things. It's either this here, this big one, or it could be this little tiny one up here. And I'll answer the question for both. Okay. So, first one, let's talk about the little one up here. If this guy is bouncing, that's good. It means your MIDI controller is hooked up correctly and it's selected correctly from the MIDI from chooser windows. Right now I can select all ends, or I can specifically select individual MIDI controller. Next, if this indicator is showing up, that's great. It means your routing, your monitor section is set up correctly. It's just waiting for you to drop a device on that track. There's nothing for it to trigger. So if I drop in a device, that can be one built in, or that can be a third party. I drop one in, it changes to an audio indicator. So now it tells you the level of the audio coming out of that device. But to go back and answer the monitor question, we have three different options. We have in, auto, and off. Now auto is kind of like the best of both worlds. So if I wanted to monitor whatever I played, I can set it to auto and record enable. This allows me to monitor whatever I do. I can record. I'm going to launch a clip up here and record something. Okay, something simple. And you can see when I play that clip, I did not have to change any routing for it to automatically work. It's auto. And disable the record and play it back. All right. So that's what you would use, in my opinion, if you're going to record and play back. This is used when you're using Ableton as a typical recording DAW, and you just want to monitor, record, and then play back whatever you're working with. In a live situation, if I have a device on a track, I don't want to worry about playing back anything. I'm not recording anything. I just want the MIDI to always be monitored. So with it set to in, the record enable does nothing. It has no effect. It can be on or off, it doesn't matter. Right now with monitor set to in, it's always receiving audio. The only thing is it can't play any audio. So if I went back and had that clip on that track, playing it will do nothing. It's always looking for MIDI coming into that track from an external MIDI controller or another track. Off simply turns it off. It just deactivates the track. So let's see. We have been going for an hour and 15 minutes or so. No, about an hour. We started late, and we answered a lot of questions. Let's see what else I have down here. We went over controllers. We went over our routing. Went over some sound finding and making. Let's see here. Let's do sharing sounds. So going back to Loop communities, going back to their ability to share sounds with other users, we can actually use their sound park and share and download other people's sounds. So how do you do that? Let's pull up an example of one. Matt McCoy uploaded one, and you can go get it right now if you like it. And I'm just going to type in Matt McCoy, or just Matt under instrument. Was it Matt? Let's see what it was. What is it? McCoy Shine. That's what it was. There it is. Okay. I'm just going to drag that in. And Matt uploaded this, and you can actually go get it right now if you want to. So I'm going to play it for you. We have some macros that control a bunch of different parameters in these different devices. And if you create your own, let's say it looks something like this, and you want to share that, all you have to do is File, Collect All and Save. Save the set, zip it up, and upload it. And you can actually sell your sounds on loopcommunity.com. So I think that's about it. I just want to remind you that Matt and I both are Ableton Live certified trainers. And under the training link on loopcommunity.com, you can actually get one-on-one training with us. If you want to learn how to do specific things, or work within a specific setup, or just learn how to use the program on a one-to-one basis, we'd be more than happy to help you with that. We also have the ability to come to your church or your event. If you have a team that you want trained, we can do that as well, of course. We have SoundPack. Make sure you check that out. You can learn and you can actually buy different people's sounds and use them on your own. And finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter for events just like these. We, of course, posted this on Twitter. You can share it, and make sure you get all the latest information from Loop Community. Matt just said, let's see here, we've got the next, Matt has now announcing the next LoopLIVE event, which will be Matt actually making a track from scratch. Pretty cool stuff. You can learn some of his tricks, how he sets up his live set to record and to program a loop from scratch. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, there's of course the forum, and you can post those up, and Matt and I, a lot of other guys, will be happy to answer those for you. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Take care.